Let's be honest, if I told you this video was about microwaves, you might be tempted to click away. But what if I told you that the microwave oven in your kitchen exists today because of World War II radar, a melted peanut bar, and an attempt to resurrect frozen hamsters in a British lab? Yes, hamsters. In the 1950s, a government laboratory in London was trying to bring dead hamsters back to life. One scientist thought, what if we used microwave radiation instead of hot spatulas and burning lights? So he built a crude, early microwave in a mesh box. Then he put a frozen solid hamster inside and turned it on. What happened next actually worked. But this story isn't just about eccentric science. It's about how one of the most ordinary objects in your kitchen, a microwave oven, is really the product of war, death, desperation, and invention. This is the hidden history of how the microwave was born, not from culinary genius, but from radar, rodents, and remarkable engineering. Let's start where it all began, a dark time in history, a deadly war, and a secret British invention that changed everything. It's 1940, the world is at war, and Britain is under constant threat from the skies. Nazi bombers fly over London with deadly precision, and the Allies desperately need a way to see incoming planes before they strike. The solution, radar, but early radar systems are bulky and weak. They can barely detect large aircraft, let alone fast fighters or submarines. What the Allies needed was something revolutionary, something small, powerful, and precise. Enter the cavity magnetron, a device that would quietly win the war. Invented by British physicists John Randall and Harry Boot at the University of Birmingham, this strange-looking copper object was capable of generating high-frequency microwave radiation with unprecedented power. Small enough to fit inside a plane, powerful enough to detect a single aircraft, and fast enough to save lives. Here's how it worked. At its core, the magnetron had a heated metal filament called a cathode, surrounded by a block of copper, the anode. When electric current passed through, electrons shot from the cathode toward the anode. But then came the twist. A strong magnetic field forced the electrons to spiral, not just shoot straight. That spiraling energy passed by small resonating cavities, generating microwave radiation, concentrated, invisible energy at the perfect frequency for radar. It was genius, but it was also fragile. Each unit had to be hand-built with almost impossibly tight tolerances, down to just 2.5 microns. That's about 1/40th the width of a human hair. The magnetron worked, but it wasn't ready for mass production, and the clock was ticking. Britain turned to America and to a small Massachusetts company called Raytheon. There, a brilliant engineer named Percy Spencer was about to transform the magnetron from a scientific marvel into an industrial miracle. At Raytheon, the magnetron landed in the hands of Percy Spencer, a self-taught engineer who never finished high school, but who understood electromagnetic waves better than most PhDs. Spencer's task wasn't to invent something new. It was to build thousands of magnetrons fast, with the kind of precision that only a master machinist could achieve, except there weren't enough master machinists. Here was the problem. Each magnetron required a series of resonant cavities drilled into solid copper, and each one had to be machined to within 1/10,000th of an inch. Even a tiny variation could throw off the frequency and ruin the radar signal. And each unit took about a week to complete. That wasn't fast enough to win a war. So Spencer did what great engineers do. He broke the problem down. Instead of machining one solid copper block, he redesigned the magnetron from the inside out using thin copper sheets, punched with parts of the cavities. 13 of these laminated sheets were then stacked to form the final shape, each layer produced rapidly with high-pressure stamping machines. What once took a week now took minutes. Raytheon could suddenly produce 2,500 magnetrons a day, and Percy Spencer didn't stop there. The original magnetron was water-cooled, clunky, and expensive. Spencer's version, air-cooled, lighter, simpler, and built for battle. These new magnetrons powered the radar systems aboard Allied ships and aircraft across the Atlantic and Pacific. They helped detect U-boats, guide bombers, and turn the tide of war. But all of this innovation had a side effect. One day, while working near an active radar set, Spencer noticed something strange. The chocolate bar in his pocket had melted. That's the part of the story people love to tell. But what really matters isn't the candy. It's the moment he realized If radar waves can melt chocolate, maybe they can cook food. And just like that, Spencer's mind jumped from war to lunch. The age of the microwave oven was about to begin. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic in 1950s Britain, another strange chapter of microwave history was unfolding, and this one wasn't about cooking dinner. It was about bringing frozen animals back to life. At the National Institute for Medical Research, a government lab on the outskirts of London, scientists were studying cryobiology, the effects of extreme cold on living tissue. Their mission: understand how to preserve blood, organs, maybe even people. Their test subjects: rats and hamsters. The scientists would submerge these small animals in a bath of propylene glycol, a kind of airplane de-icer, then cool them until they stopped breathing. No heartbeat, core temperatures near freezing. Clinically, they were dead. To rewarm them, researchers tried hot spatulas pressed to the chest. They used intense beams of light to shock the system awake. Sometimes it worked. But the survivors often had severe burns, and the process was messy and inhumane. One researcher thought there had to be a better way. His name, James Lovelock. You may know him as the creator of Gaia theory or the inventor of NASA's electron capture detector. But back then, he was just a curious young scientist with a wild idea. Why not use microwaves? Lovelock had heard about radar magnetrons and how they could generate deep, penetrating heat. So for 10 shillings of his own money, he bought a surplus RAF transmitter. Then, with a bit of help from military contacts, he managed to get his hands on an actual 10-centimeter magnetron, the same kind that once tracked enemy planes. He mounted it inside a metal mesh box, a homemade Faraday cage. Then he turned it on. According to Lovelock, the first test subject, a hamster frozen solid like a block of wood, was placed inside. They activated the microwave, watched the temperature rise, and then the hamster twitched, its paws moved, it blinked. And then it stood up and began wandering around, fully reanimated. They had brought it back, no burns, no spasms, just a small, confused rodent that had returned from the edge of death. This wasn't myth. The research was published, the survival rates were charted, and many of those revived animals were even retired to animal homes once their experiments were done. Let's be clear, this wasn't about cruelty. This was science chasing the edges of what life and death really meant, and the tool they used. It was a microwave. The microwave, born from war, revived hamsters, and one melted chocolate bar still wasn't ready for your kitchen counter. In 1946, Raytheon released the first commercial microwave oven. It was called the Raider-Range, and it was massive, over 5 feet tall, water-cooled, consuming 3,000 watts of power. It had to be wired directly into a 220-volt line and plumbed into the wall. It wasn't designed for families. It was designed for restaurants, to cook full lobsters, roast turkeys, and shave minutes off meal prep. Fast cooking was the goal, not affordability or convenience. But as the post-war years rolled on, the definition of best began to change. Best wasn't about speed anymore. It was about cost, simplicity, compatibility with the average home. So engineers changed the magnetron again. Gone were the expensive El Ninco magnets, replaced by cheap ceramic rings. Gone were the water-cooled systems, now replaced by air-cooled aluminum fins. Gone was the tight radar precision. The new microwave ovens didn't need to detect Nazi bombers. They just needed to warm soup and heat up leftovers. Even the cavity designs changed, from precisely machined circular tubes to punched trapezoidal shapes, all stamped by machines in minutes. The power dropped too, from 3,000 watts to around 650. That meant you could plug it into a regular 115-volt wall socket. Sure, it took longer to cook, but that's what made it perfect for the modern family kitchen. By the late 1960s and 70s, microwave ovens were becoming smaller, cheaper, and more common, not as a replacement for the stove, but as a convenient companion. And in the process, a high-precision wartime instrument became one of the most ordinary devices in the modern world. It started as a way to detect enemies. It helped reanimate frozen animals. It got a candy bar to melt. And today it's how you reheat your coffee. That's the thing about invention. What counts as best is always changing. The microwave oven didn't start in a kitchen. It started in war rooms, radar labs, and government research centers, surrounded by fear, ambition, and the limits of what was possible. It evolved not because of one genius moment, but because of 1,000 small choices made by engineers, scientists, and problem solvers who saw what could be, not just what was. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a frozen hamster came back to life. So next time you hear the soft hum of a microwave, remember you're listening to the echo of war, invention, and one very determined rodent. And if you think this story was strange, wait until you find out what's hiding inside a copper pan. Because in this world, even the most ordinary object might just have a secret past.